Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson, and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of the show is to ask questions about chess and the chess world. If you haven't heard this spiel before, every week we have a chat on the right of your screen, should be on the right of your screen if you're watching on YouTube, where players can ask questions live, but you can also send questions in advance to my email at askthemaster@chessclub. AskIamWatson at chessclub.com. That's AskImWatson at chessclub.com. And then I'll get to those questions. Those can be in any kind of detail you want. And a good thing about that method is you can send me games of your own if you want to, and I can show the games online and talk about them. You can make any comments you want to. You can ask about anything you want to. For example, chess history, chess books, anything like chess openings, which we talk about a lot, chess improvement, chess strategy, etc., etc. Maybe even current events in the chess world. And you can send me any opinions you want or anything, and it's a very wide open show. And the chat is also very wide open. Let me check it right now and see what I have. If anybody's talking here on the chat, let me go over here. Oh, here we go. Got some things here. Can everybody hear me? Might want to get a yes there by somebody. Ellen, you want to give me a yes that everything's fine? And so we usually often have technical problems, so it'd be good to do that. Oh, Ellen's got a question. Any of you that are watching, tell me that you can hear me okay or not if there's a problem. Okay, I have a question. Was Fischer at his best? Better than Kasparov at his best, in your opinion, or don't you want to say? Yeah, I think that, can you hear me, by the way? I haven't gotten any response from that. Of course, there's a big delay, probably 45 seconds delay before I see any response, but aha, I get a yes. Thank you. That's great. That's great. Yeah, great question. Probably the classic, one of the classic chess questions. I think Kasparov at his best was better than anybody in chess history, except we have to be careful because now Magnus Carlsen, with the amazing results he's had, you almost wonder. But it's very hard to compare, especially I would say the people like Carlsen and Aronian, the people today, with even Kramnik and Anand, who were at least in Kasparov's generation, with Kasparov. I do think that they're all better than Fischer, but you got to remember this is with the benefit of much better training, playing more top players all the time, huge amounts of information about chess, starting earlier with more information and more intense study. So it's not a fair comparison. But if you wanted to say objectively who was best. Now that's interesting because we have a great players discussion that's gotten started a little bit, and hopefully we'll get to that. I'd like to hear more about that, like who people think the great players are. And in that case, I think you have to give them allowance for their era. For example, Lasker has to be on that list, even though Lasker obviously wouldn't be able to compete as he was at that time with the top players today. At least I don't think he would be able to. But if he grew up with studying the kind of things that people have now and had played the kind of competition that these players get to play and have the training and the resources, of course, he might be the world champion or something. We don't really know, but in terms of achievements, I think it's interesting to compare players, and of course he'd be way up there in terms of achievements. But as far as actual objective playing strength, I would say that Kasparov and Carlsen and really many of the players today are better than what Fischer was at his peak, but that's just my opinion. Fischer at his peak certainly was an incredibly great player. So let me go. I don't see anything quite here. Oh, Letelier Fischer. Thank you about the Perpetual Chess podcast. It was fun. It was kind of interesting thing to do. I didn't prepare at all. A couple of the questions really threw me. You may have noticed that. And I wasn't quite sure what to say, but I think in general it went pretty well. It's a great show. It's called Perpetual Chess Podcast. You can just Google it. And he's had maybe, I don't know, 50 of them or something. He's had wonderful guests on, including, for example, Judith Polgar recently, and Danny Gormley, and a lot of other top players, but also people who are in the chess world, teachers and authors. He likes authors, people like that. And so it's an interview show on a podcast. and you might want to take a look at it. Perpetual Chess Podcast. Perpetual Chess is the website, and you can go from there. Okay, without further ado, I want to handle some things from last week. Well, let me make an announcement first, though. I'm going to soon be starting a new video series on ICC, maybe 10 to 15 videos on each subject. So I thought I'd ask you guys for ideas about subjects that you would be interested in. This would come to askiamwatson@chessclub.com. I don't want you to just throw out a chat idea. Well, you can if you want to, but it'd be better if you kind of think about it a little bit, what would fit. But just to give you an example, I was thinking about doing a series on transitions that go to endgames, that go either right from the opening, which is kind of interesting, or from the middle games, just how to transition to the end game. And I think that's a weakness of some players, but also players who enjoy somewhat simplified positions might get a lot out of that. And maybe they would even want to know some certain openings where they can very likely get to some sort of end game position, or at least a very simplified position which would head to an end game quickly, or hopefully quickly, because there's some players that simply, maybe they're older, or maybe like me, or maybe that's just what they like to play, and they're kind of tired of all these complex things, or frankly just think they can't really handle them as well as as their opponents, and want to take advantage of the fact that a lot of younger players, for example, aren't very good in simplified positions, and in particular endgames. Okay, anyway, any ideas about a video series that you can send me at the usual email, askiamwatson@chessclub.com, and I'll really appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to get through some older games here and some questions. So let me start with, okay, I was asked about, by Chess Philosopher actually, I saw Aronian play the black side of an English with e5, knight c6, bishop c5, and a6. I haven't seen, is that the one I have up there? No, it isn't. Let me put up this game. Wait a second. Sorry. Where would that be? I will get there, folks. Okay, that's actually, what game is that? That's 342. Yeah, unfortunately I was sending notes and I covered it up. Okay, there we go. Where he thought he saw Aronian playing the black side of a English opening. This is the English with e5, and then playing knight c6, bishop c5, and a6, and then h5. Then he's seen a line where black plays h5 against g3 for white, which is kind of it's an older theme in the English opening that's been played a lot over the years. It's not the main line in most variations, but it's usually there in many, many variations. He said, it seems a dynamic and interesting way to play. Please go over. Okay, I couldn't find any games with Aronian as black because he tends to be a very consistent bishop b4 player. For example, some main old line like this, and the four knights, he'll always play bishop b4. He also plays knight f6 almost always. So I have a feeling that it's not Aronian, but that you probably saw Aronian playing the white side, because he's a big English opening player, and he's had a couple games against this system with knight c6. So let me show you that. So there's knight c6. There's g3, the most common response, and a Sicilian reversed, trying to cover this diagonal, and in particular those two central squares. And black plays this move bishop c5, which has never been extremely popular until recently. And recently there have been quite a few players playing that as black and doing perfectly well with it. It's the sort of thing you wouldn't play as white against a Sicilian usually, and here you are a tempo behind. But remember, you're really just trying to equalize and get a solid game, so that's really the difference. It's not an ambitious move. So let's make a few more moves. There's that not quite yet. There's that a6 move. Now this is a game between Aronian as white and Nakamura as black, and it's a fun game, so I thought I'd show you that. This is from the Norway Chess a couple years ago, 2015. So let's take a look at this, and maybe I'll check my notes too while I'm at it. Why not? Because I want to see if there's anything. The only player who's played this as black consistently in the old days is Paco Vallejo, but now it's being played a little bit more as black. Okay, so white plays e3. What's the point of that? It's to cut down the diagonal of that bishop, and maybe even play d4 with tempo, which not only takes over the center, or attacks in the center, but wins a tempo against the bishop on c5. So in fact, that's what happens. White plays there to support d4. Black retreats. White plays a3, not the only move, but he's thinking about playing b4 now, before he plays d4. Or maybe before he plays d4. And black plays this move that you're talking about, this h5 system. And the idea is to open a file over here for the rook by playing h4, and that also discourages castling, because if you castle right into that open rook file, that's of course dangerous. So white is likely to delay castling at least. Now he can stop that, and that's been done, but that gives up this square. For example, black could play here now with a kind of irritating pin and irritating pressure on that square, because f3 of course blocks off your own bishop and weakens pawns on that side of the board. So h4 is playable, but probably not that great a move. If you can not play it, it's better. So white goes ahead and breaks in the center. The minute there's this flank move with h5, white responds in the center, and that's very typical. And as I say, he doesn't want to castle anyway, so this is a way of getting his pieces out quickly and not castle into the attack. Let me quickly see if I have any notes on that. Okay, so black plays h4. That's his idea. White plays b4. Now, one thing white's thinking about is playing c5, because that really cuts this bishop off from having influence in the game. You'll see that happening. In fact, very soon. Nakamura said he could have played h3 too, and that's very double-edged. Let me just show you a real quick line with that. This is actually very interesting. White might choose to play that way, which gives up the light squares, but they're going to be very hard to get to because this bishop is like a pawn now. It's not going to go anywhere for a long, long time. So this is a very complicated position because you've given up the light squares. So all of black's other pieces besides that bishop are rather dangerous. Now he's thinking about playing queen f3, for example. And he gives the line knight b1. That's to get rid of the queen when it comes in here. Here, now the idea is to play knight d2 for white and get rid of the queen. Did I get this right? Yeah, here. And now he has white playing like this and attacking here, and black defending. I'll just stop there. He considers this, for example, if white tries to now get rid of the, okay, the queen wins a pawn, and that's a passed pawn. So white might want to try to draw here, and the way to draw is to play this nice little move. And the queen's trapped, but it's not trapped enough because black can play over here, threatening to move the pawn, and then all we get here is a draw. Very oddball repetition right out of the opening. Anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting. But instead, he just develops a piece, and white does that move we talked about, blocking off the bishop, really making it look like a stupid piece is the idea. On the other hand, that takes time, and black's got other active pieces. So it's a very double-edged position. White develops, black uses the light squares, which makes so much sense. White gets ready to maybe castle queenside some lines, but he also puts just more pressure on the center. And black goes ahead and commits to that h3 move. Then takes in the center, and now white takes with the knight so as not to open up the position too much for black's pieces on the file, for one thing. And also the idea of getting rid of this light square bishop would be really nice, because that would leave white with two bishops, and also he wouldn't have to worry about the light squares so much. Black moves that bishop. He doesn't want to lose that for a knight. White takes. White captures, and then plays back. And that's an indication that probably black is equalized, because this bishop will probably get out now at some point. White might take that, for example, which means that probably, and white has very nice pieces, but black's pieces are okay too. If he tried something else like taking here or something, black has a very dangerous move, hitting these squares, and that's awfully dangerous, so that's probably not worth it. So Aronian goes back here, and Nakamura keeps his queen to stay on these light squares. That's going to really discourage white from castling queenside, for example. White takes a pawn, and black castles, pinning the pawn, and white plays. These may not be the absolute best moves. That, he says, is a serious error. Rook c1. It's the first mistake of the game, really. The best move, he thinks, is to be really chicken and just go like that and try and get the queens off, because white stands pretty decently positionally. So if black, if he can take the queens off, that might be good. So black probably avoids taking the queens off and threatens queen f3, and then white can just come back again. That's probably the best White's going to do, because after this move that he actually made, Black gets that pawn with tempo and has he starts to get quite an attack here. Once again, he avoids the exchange of queens, threatening queen f3, but now you'll notice there's no queen to d1, so he tries queen e2 with the same plan, but now there's this nice move, which he said he missed actually. Knight e5. Aronian said he missed this because now he's threatening knight d3 and knight f3. So Aronian just thought Hikaru would avoid the exchange of queens, but it turns out that after the exchange of queens, he still has a very big attack. Check. And he makes an odd move here because he gives up the exchange with tempo, with knight takes c1 check. So he could have played king f1, but king f1 is actually still not getting out of trouble because this king is still quite exposed. These two pieces are attacked, so White would have to do something like this, and then Black has this very nice move. And that's what Hikaru said he was intending to play. The point being that if he takes, there's a check. If he goes this way, there's rook f2, forcing him onto the d file. If he goes this way, there's this very simple move, very sadistic move here, threatening mate. So that's a nice little variation. If you're saying things on the chat, I'll be right back to that. Maybe I should check just to make sure you're hearing me okay. Let me buzz back to there. The Karpov line. Yeah, bishop c5. Usually the Karpov line, let me see, happens with knight f6 and knight c3 already in. Well, that's when White's already played the 4 knights, is the Karpov line. So White's played knight f3 and knight c3, and Black's played knight f6 and knight c6, and then Black plays bishop c5. And it's very similar to what happens here, except that the h5, h4 idea isn't as likely to happen, because in that case the knight should probably go to e7. But yeah, Karpov played that structure very successfully, and it's quite respectable. This order, though, is actually still very unusual. Historically, it's extremely unusual. We have a question here that Alan asks about some moves. Okay, we'll get back to that. So let me finish the game, and then we'll get back to the chat. So how'd the game go? Let me get back there. Well, actually, you can see how Black's winning that one right away. So after knight d3 check, he actually just goes up and gives up that rook. That explains why he gave up that exchange. And the problem is now, and I could even stop here. Maybe I will stop here. This is a matter of technique for someone like Hikaru. He's the exchange up really for nothing. I could show you what White's idea was. Well, not much of an idea, I guess, to go here. Maybe he thought he could get this pawn at some point. I'm sorry, whoops. Rook e5, folks. Okay. And I'll just stop there. Hikaru himself said that he thought the rest of the game was pretty simple. Okay, so that's that game. Let me go back to the chat, and then we'll head for the next game. We have someone once played bishop e6 in a similar position to me instead of h5 and bishop a7 and took an early bath. But bishop e6 is probably okay. Bishop f5 is much more common. Karpov played bishop c5 and I think bishop f5 also. It actually goes way back when I was writing my first English opening books. It was a fairly popular system. But I was just going to say not this order that we had in this game. I'll go back to this game one more time. This move order is considered too cooperative, or used to be considered too cooperative, because White, first of all, isn't committed to knight f3, which he usually is in the Karpov games. And so he can put the knight on e2 with e3 and blast through with d4. Although actually that is true. He can still do that in some of the Karpov systems too, so I take that back. But it's just considered too early to be playing this, although it can transpose sometimes. But then recently, people have decided they could get away with it as long as they play d6 and a6 and have a place to put the bishop and save where the knight goes for a little while. Okay, that's enough for that game though. In fact, I think I'll put up the next game. Oh yeah, this is a reader game. I want to get through more of these reader games because I always promise I'm going to. EX percentage 88. There we go. And let me get to the chat though first, so we can talk about that. We have, okay, d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, castles e5. Yeah, that's an old line. Oh, the Fischer-Letellier. Of course, yeah, Fischer definitely wanted to allow e5. Yeah, he knew incredible amounts of theory, especially about the King's Indian. So definitely he did. Let me show everybody that. He's talking about the King's Indian. It starts out with a sort of a main line, all the natural moves that everybody has played for many, many years. Here, castles instead. Now d6 is usually played. The main reason d6 is usually played is because the bishop g5 systems are harder to meet if you haven't played d6 first. At least that's my opinion. I found that this is more difficult for black than usual. Basically, you just don't get c5 and queen a5 moves like that in as quickly. You need the d6 move for that. And in a way, in some of those lines, castles is a wasted tempo, oddly enough. At least that's the main reason, I think, why we don't play. And there may be other reasons too, so I shouldn't limit myself to that, but that's one reason. Okay, but black allows also this move, but that's not considered bad, partly because everybody knows the Fischer-Letellier game. I'm sorry, Letellier-Fischer, I guess. The point is black's going to break up the center with d6 and c5 and maybe knight c6 also attacking these squares. Notice how this is attacking. This is called an overextended center. Now maybe it's still equal. I'm sure it is still equal, but white doesn't really want to be equal this early on. The idea is that if you attack like that, it's not a very good 4 pawns. These moves are coming too quickly. Also bishop g4, if you play knight f3, the most natural move, that indirectly attacks these 2 squares by eliminating a defender of those squares. And actually white's okay, probably okay in these positions. It seems like I've looked at them before, but very much Fischer definitely wanted to allow e5. And in future games, very few people played e5 in this position. Most players played either knight f3 or some other system. And as I say, I worry about this move here. Okay, so that's hopefully an answer to that one. Let me, in fact, go back for a second to the chat and see what else we have here. Marin calls it the carpal tunnel. Here we go. And Ears, with his usual crazy sense of humor, says much better than the carpool line. No d4 wins a piece. No d4. Well, I'm not sure what that's about. My apologies if I did something wrong. All right, so we have. So let me do the next thing because I want to catch up on some of this stuff. Here's a game. There we go. That was played by Tom Leah. He says, I play the Berlin defense against Ruy Lopez. I often end up in equal middle game positions except I have the bishop pair. What are some strategies for making progress when you have the bishop pair? I know this is a difficult question to answer. My grade is 160 ECF, which is pretty good. So I know much of the basics such as opening the position, but I lack the skill to turn these positions into an advantage. Okay, so here's an example, and the questions he has about this example, first of all, here's the Berlin variation, and he means the main line of it. Well, he means one of the main lines, sorry, actually, the very main line is, of course, this, and an awful lot of you have seen this before. We haven't talked about it a lot, but we have talked about it a little bit. This endgame. So there's an endgame where black has the 2 bishops. And this endgame is a little different. White plays here, and black goes back, and white takes and takes. So black has 2 bishops. It's actually a middle game, as he pointed out, because the queens aren't off. So actually, I shouldn't say endgame. It's a middle game with 2 bishops for black. And so that's what this question is about. He says, should I try to reach an endgame with a bishop pair? And I would say yes if you can. Usually going for the ending is a pretty good idea when you have the bishop pair. And this pawn structure turns out to be pretty decent for an endgame. Even though it's famously, that's a funny thing to say, because famously white likes to work against these pawns, but in the Ruy Lopez, but it turns out that with 2 bishops and symmetrical position otherwise, I think it's a fine ending for black. It's a reasonable endgame for black. Of course, it completely depends on the position. Sometimes white's better, sometimes black's better. How do I make my bishop pair actually count in such positions? Okay, the answer to that is that you want to slowly restrict the knights. It's the Steinitz technique. Try to make sure the knights don't get any outposts, and then try to drive them back if you can. And then finally, after you've really driven back the knights and established your development, then you can think about opening the position. I would say you open the position very slowly when you have the bishop pair. That's in the middle game. It doesn't really matter where you are in the game. There's a tendency for people to think they have to open up the game right away. And if you open up the game early, oftentimes the knights are extremely strong. Whereas if you wait and wait, you can time opening up the position to where your bishops become strong, but the knights don't. So don't be in a big rush to open the position. You probably won't need to. The bishops can stay passive for a while. That doesn't usually matter much. but try to restrict the knights, restrict their forward movement. Maybe you know of an example game. Okay, so let's look at an example game. Let me keep that page there. His game, first of all, and then we'll also have an example game to talk about. Okay, so in this game, white plays d4. That's just natural, getting the pieces out, black castles, and white plays bishop b3, which is a good move with the idea of just getting the bishop out. It's a little awkward. The bishop's looking for a place to go to. It's kind of white's bad bishop. You always look at the center pawns to see whether you've got a good or a bad bishop. Now, it's not terrible. Obviously, that's a fairly active square. But it just turns out that this b3 move is kind of nice. It restricts this knight a little bit if you've kicked this knight. It prepares c4, so it'll be protected. And the bishop has quite a nice influence on this side of the board, one of those squares. So it's a pretty good flexible move. Black played bishop e6. Now I wanted to show you an example of black slowly but surely finding outposts for his pieces and keeping white's knights under check, the way I just described. So let me show you this example. This is, I don't even know who these players are, Pricodo and Lasuge. So black is a 2650 player, white's a 2330. So you might just think black just outplays white, but let's see how anyway. So this is going to be a good example of how black could play. At least I thought it was a good example. I looked at a bunch of examples, and I think this one is really, see, grab some space. Space is always important. And then you start, and white tries to defy that a4 move. And then you start driving the knights back. It goes here. He doesn't mind exchanging rooks, partly because he does have the bishop pair, and exchanging tends to be pretty good when you have the bishop pair. Bishop f5, he brings the bishop out. Queen up, he connects rooks, or rook in this case, knight e4. Queen e7 attacking the knight. I mean, I like black already in this position, although, you know, it's nothing special, but could have gotten that wrong, by the way. Did I get that right? Not queen e7, my fault. Knight e1, knight f7, excuse me, I got something wrong here. Bishop f5, queen f3, queen d7, knight d3, rook e8. Rook takes, knight f7, knight d3. There we go, excuse me. So black played knight f7 when? Rook e8, rook e1 takes, knight takes. I have something horribly wrong here. My apologies. Where did I lose track? a4, oh, f6, knight d3, rook e1, knight e1. I'll get there. Queen f3, queen d7. Okay, knight d3 now. Rook e8, rook e1 again. Oh, I see. That's why I was a little confused, because it's sort of they repeat these two moves. So once again, rook takes, knight f7. And you'll start to see how in an endgame you can, I think I told you the story about how in games where I was getting in time trouble, I used to look for anything where I could have the bishop pair in the endgame and just head for that, so I wouldn't have to think too hard, and just see if I could somehow organize that and then worry about it once I got once I got to time control. Worked pretty well as a strategy. Okay, so we have queen e3, it looks like. Oh no, we have knight d3 again. Knight g5 attacking the queen. Queen e3, b6, restricting the knight again from that square. So you're kind of holding the knights back, trying to make sure they don't have forward squares, and certainly not outposts, right? So white plays h3, black plays knight e6, centralizing your knight. And I wonder how far I was going to go here. Knight e4, bishop g6, bishop a1, queen e8, a little bit of an indirect attack on that knight. Bishop knight d2. Let me see what move I'm in. 24. Queen e7, bishop b2, sorry, queen e7. Bishop b2. So this is typical. When you're in no hurry, you don't have to break open the position right away. Eventually you probably will, but you're just making moves for now. The queen went back here, and black changed his mind about his plan. He went back to d8. So this is kind of typical in a way where these queens were vis-a-vis. I'm not sure if he really allowed that, but he may have. Queen d7, because an endgame is usually okay. Black probably didn't want this endgame because it strengthened white's pawn center. So it looks like he offered this ending, but thought it would be tough to win, just because white would have 2 pawns to nothing in the center, and that's always hard to win, no matter whether they have 2 bishops or not. So he avoided the exchange of queens, I think. I think we've got that right. That's move 27. Knight came back. Knight came back, and now this cute little move, knight b7. Queen f3, avoiding the exchange of queens. Queen d7, queen e3. This just goes on and on. So they're just goofing around, and I'm wondering if this is even worth it at this point. Oh, I'm sorry, not queen d6, knight d6. See if I get to some point where it seems obvious what's going on. c3, knight f5, queen e2, knight e7, knight f4, bishop f7. You definitely want to keep your bishops. We're on move 34. Knight c4, queen f5. I wonder if I could stop here. Maybe not quite yet. Knight d3. Now actually bishop g6 was a very good move now, but this was not bad either. Knight d5. The point is these knights aren't going anywhere. They're not going forward. And that means you can slowly but surely activate your pieces. So maybe I'll stop there. Soon there's going to be this bishop g6 move. And you can see this bishop's very bad. And you have a big advantage. This knight is better than either one of White's knights. Okay, so let's just stop there because I don't want to take the whole time doing that. Okay, let me go back to the chat and then I'll get to the next question. And in the chat we have some good questions, it looks like. Oh, d4. You played bishop e6 at a point where d4, d5 won a piece because there was a knight on c6 hanging. Okay, so that was just a blunder. But you can play bishop e6 in many of these lines. I don't think we need to play over this this game, Alan. But all he's saying is he fell for the idea of d4 attacking the bishop, bishop retreats, d5 attacking the bishop on e6 and a knight on c6. That's the problem, putting the bishop on b2 so quickly accelerates black's play. Okay. Yeah, maybe it's a little passive, isn't it, John? Yeah, I mean, black gets developed quickly. Is the closed English considered sharp and or tactical? It can be very sharp. I lost a game to Walter Brown where he just bowled me over on the king side by playing f5, g5. So he had e5, f5, g5, and just blasted through with, I don't know, f4 sacrifice. And it's horrible. One of my most embarrassing games. So yeah, it can be aggressive. But of course, if you play well, you shouldn't. White playing the English should never allow a huge. It shouldn't have to allow a huge attack. Okay, it seems similar to the Dutch Leningrad with White not having d4 and Black not having e5. What to consider if we were choosing which to play as Black? Whether to play the Dutch or the closed English. Yeah, it's kind of a funny choice because the minute you play c4, e5, you don't have a chance of getting into an actual Dutch anymore. You can still play f5, but it's not quite the same as a Leningrad Dutch. So you can play both. You can play the Dutch Leningrad against d4, and you can play this kind of system, the closed English, against c4. So let me just see. So John's saying that a5 in that closed English, I don't know if you guys remember that, but that threatened to play a4, so that made the b3 move look a little odd, and meant that White had to weaken himself more than Black, basically. I think that's what he means. Pretty sure that's what he means. And if not, my apologies. So you can play both those things, Chess Philosopher, and I would say that of the two, I prefer the closed English. I think the Leningrad Dutch is reasonable. It's gotten less popular recently. Everybody's playing the Stonewall. Some people are playing the classical. The Leningrad doesn't seem to be as popular anymore. And I used to enjoy playing against the Leningrad, but it's fun. It's like a King's Indian where you already have f5 in, but somehow if White really knows what he's doing, he tends to get an advantage against the Leningrad, in my opinion. So I would play the closed English. I probably wouldn't play the Leningrad. Is he the most famous player you played? Well, no, I played Larson and Polgar and I don't know who else. I played some good players. Ronian. Who else did I play? I'm missing out on people. I know once I looked at the most famous players when they were still very highly rated. Kamsky, Polgar, and Gulko, for example. I got draws against every one of them. So it's funny, when I played way up, I tended to do okay. I think in every case I was better and I messed up. And I tried hard to win, but just didn't get it right. And they showed their resourcefulness even when they were in trouble, and in a way that I never would have. I would have lost the games that I drew against them. So I was impressed even when they weren't at their, they didn't have a great result against me. I still was very impressed. And of course the postmortems are wonderful. Okay. No, I played a lot of GMs. The ones I mentioned were the only ones who maybe were at their peak when I played them. And yeah, I drew all those. Let me see. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused here. Okay, so that's the end of the chat for the moment. So I'm going to buzz on to the next question. I was asked last week what are the best books on opening theory in general, not on specific openings, that is, and I very modestly said that Mastering the Chess Opening is my own series. It's 4 volumes, so that means a certain investment, unless you can get a copy from a friend or used. Does that. It's all about ideas of openings and strategies. And I really couldn't think of any others that I liked. I mean, there's old ones like Zdozo Borovsky. So Nosko Borovsky did something about ideas. There's Ruben Fine, Ideas in the Chess Openings. I think those books are out of date, and I think Fine's is just bad, actually. I think it's dogmatic and doesn't make much sense, actually. So there's more recent ones. So I was thinking I couldn't think of any others. So I went through a whole bunch of books that do either make the claim to explain strategies. One thing is most books don't talk about sort of all openings in general. They talk about specific ones, of course. And if you really want to know, I'll just say, in spite of, pumping my own Mastering the Chess Openings, if you really want to learn about the ideas of the opening, the best way is to get a book that really talks about those ideas in detail, with a detailed discussion. So that's the best way to do it. Just do it one opening at a time. But my series is a little more general than that. It talks about all the openings. One encyclopedia that at least tries to give you a bunch of ideas as well as moves is Paul van der Sterren's Fundamental Chess Openings. That's 2009. And I was having trouble finding anything else. There's a book by Sam Collins, but I'm not that fond of it. But it does talk about strategies and ideas for the openings. And an interesting series that would go up to maybe, I'm guessing about 1800 or so rating, and would be good even for beginners, is by ChessBase. It's a tutorial. They're called tutorials, ChessBase tutorials. I think there's 5 or 6 of them. They're grouped according to type, like flank openings or E4 openings or that kind of breakdown. And I think they're quite good. I think they're excellent. They give you strategic ideas about all these openings. Not much detail, but that's okay because that's not what you're really asking about. It covers groups of openings. I think it's really good for the developing player, but it's pretty elementary. And my books, of course. So let me see. What's the next thing? I have a question. I'm trying to cover some from quite a long time ago. This is one about the English Rossolimo. I've been trying to make the English Rossolimo reversed playable. So we have a couple English openings today, which is good because we haven't hardly ever talked about it in the course of this, couple of years of this series. We don't talk about it enough. He says, but I keep running into the move knight d5. I know I'm not alone since Aronian expresses the same attitude in the latest new in chess. And of course, Aronian is a big English opening player. And so if he says something like that, you can understand. Oh, actually, no, because you're talking about from the black point of view. So that's interesting. So he's saying from the black point of view that can give him well, of course, because Aronian plays the bishop b4 systems, which I think I already mentioned. And after bishop b4, there are a lot of knight d5s. So let's put up a game. Let's put up one of the games that he sent. A couple games. I'll probably be pretty superficial with them because of time, but it's a kind of position we haven't looked at, and that's kind of cool. So let me see. Let me get my notes on this game. Okay, here's how it goes. And I'm not going to talk about the opening much. It's just a question about. Okay, here's what he means by Rossolimo reversed. Is this move bishop b4? That's because in the Sicilian, if you can kind of picture this in your mind, there's e4, c5, knight f3, and if not, whoops, sorry, knight f3, and if knight c6, bishop b5. Right, in the Sicilian. So this is really the reversed idea for black. It's actually also the main line of the English here. Or one of the old main line of the English with g3 as the 4th move. Certainly the main line of the E5 English, but arguably the main line of the entire English. So white's playing knight D5 really early, as Marin, no, he suggested next move in his book, I think. Is that right? Yeah, one more move later, I'm pretty sure. But it's also played on the 5th move. And black takes, and that's the usual solution. And this is also a very common solution. I'm not sure if you can do anything else there. Is that right? And right now you can't, because if you play that, he actually can take that pawn. And I suspect this is quite good because you have 2 center pawns, 2, 1. There's also things where you're attacking 2 pieces. It could be a little bit of a problem. Probably not immediately too bad because you can play queen here with that pin on the file once the knight moves. Sorry, I don't remember looking at this. I should know this. But it looks to me like knight e7 is very, very risky at best. So black plays knight d4. And usually white takes. If white takes this way, he can fall for this horrible trap. Now, if he's really careless and moves the knight straight away, he's going to run into something like this move. Checkmate. Wouldn't that be fun? Maybe you can get that in your game. I actually had a mate sort of like that in one of my games. I felt really sorry for my opponent. He looked so crestfallen. And what else can you do? Well, you can defend it, right? But then presumably, now this is going to be a little tricky. I think this will work because if check, attacking the bishop, you can't actually take it after what? This move? You can't actually take that because of this. So it looks to me like f4 d6 is going to win a piece because once again, if the it's going to drive the king to f2. That may not be the end of the world. Let's make absolutely sure. So knight here. I guess queen here is the best move. See the problem? If you go here now, it's true you've made the king move, but so what? White's actually tremendously well off here because he's also threatening check. So it looks like queen e4, which also indirectly defends the bishop against queen a4 takes. Okay, I'm just speculating here. I'll have to actually look this up. But you're attacking the rook. If the rook moves here, you have knight here, and you're going to take that rook. So, which, by the way, is probably not completely clear, but interesting. So, I've never looked at all this. I should have, shouldn't I? I'm supposed to be an English opening expert. So anyway, this is you can see at least that that's extraordinarily risky. So instead, white plays there. Every time I've ever seen this opening, he played there. White develops. Fun. It's fun how you can see these side things when you're actually answering a question for the first time. And you realize there's these little odd things that could happen instead of what you know happens usually. Okay, now why did he play bishop e7? Because he wants to get his bishop out of being attacked, but he also wants to defend the pawn with c5, and he doesn't want to cut off his bishop from coming back. So c5 defends this pawn. White attacks the center. Takes back to open this file and maybe support moves like d4, e4 and d4. It's got some extra center pawn. Black plays here. Black structure is quite nice, right? This bishop has a free reign. This bishop can go here very dynamically. He's got an open e-file. So white attacks with b4. That makes a lot of sense to me. And then he has to move his rook. White's big advantage is development. He's got a couple pieces out. Black's advantage is that his structure is very nice. Okay, so now white has these passed pawns in the center, but black's also very active. What white does with d4 is an odd move, but the idea is that he's going to give up a pawn with bishop b2. And we get to this position now. The person asking the question says that this is a suggestion, bishop e2. It wasn't played in the game. And then he seems to think that if he takes the second pawn here, that would be 2 pawns up for black, that it might not be very good. So he looked at this and did some analysis. So he comes out with this move. Now the problem here is, remember we talked about this structure. That square is incredibly weak if you can drop a piece on there. These pawns are very weak and the king is exposed. So if white had even one extra move, well, for example, this move, but also rook takes f6, maybe bishop e4, he'd probably be winning. Fortunately, it's black's move, so black can protect this and make a little room around his king. White takes. Now, what? Black's only 1 pawn down, and white has great positional compensation, but that pawn's pretty strong. That e2 pawn's pretty strong. So now black starts thinking about moves like queen d2, queen a2. So black has his own little threats, even though white, obviously these pawns are very weak. White has a big attack. Tries that move. That's the move I talked about because it aims at that side of the board. And this is just all analysis, but it makes so much sense. White better take care of that pawn, or at least watch over it, because it could queen at some point. So white's king is exposed as well as black's king. So this is a good double-edged position. And he stops here and says, as they say, white is playing for 2 results, black 1. It seems to me if black is GM, she might draw, but it's going to be a struggle. I guess I agree with everything you've said, except right at this point, I think it's become very easy for black to draw this. I don't think there should be any problem at all, because look at that weakness, and this is weak, and most rook and pawn endings are going to be drawn. And how are you going to take this? You can't take it with a rook, because a rook e4. If you take it with a bishop, there's going to be a double attack, by which time black's going to have won something. So I think black's safe here. Obviously, white's doing fine too. I think, for example, let me see this move. I think I actually did pseudo-analysis. If d6, you have the f5 move, that's fine for black. If bishop takes, then it doesn't matter where the rook goes, really, but we can try something here maybe. And then you get this one. And that's almost certainly drawn, although it could be fun. It would be fun to play this out, but I don't think white's any better than black, right? Because black has 2 pass pawns here. Undoubtedly drawn because the king's well placed to stop those pawns, but white has no advantage. So that'd be my answer there. But I think it's great analysis and real interesting and fun and typical. Now that's a positional opening. A lot of people won't understand those or be familiar with those, but you should, if you can, learning some English opening lines is really important for your understanding of chess. Here's the second question he asks about the same variation. This is a Lautier and Kasparov game. Lautier did very well against Kasparov over the years. This is Joel Lautier from France. He was a leading GM for years. Didn't really, maybe he cracked the top 10 briefly, but usually was sort of what they call second tier, which is awfully strong, but so it's kind of funny word, but he did very well against Kasparov. He was at a tournament that I was in where he drew a game against Kasparov also, and I think he beat him and drew him. I mean, I don't know if he probably didn't have a plus record, but most people had massively negative records, and Lautier absolutely outperformed his rating. Is this, have I got the wrong thing on here? Yeah, this is what we just did. My fault. I thought I had typed, I think I didn't hit enter or something. There we go, sorry. Okay, so here's another variation of the Rossolimo. There we go, same thing. Knight d5, this move that people worry about. Now I think, am I right that in Marin's book it's knight d5 now, I think, is the main line. And that's very interesting. The idea is to go knight h4 in this position. It's really fascinating and fun stuff. I think black's fine, by the way. I kind of disagree with me. He has white, that whole book, he keeps having white end an advantage when really black with a small deviation can equalize, or sometimes even better. So, but it's a fun line anyway. It's an interesting line. Okay, so in this book he does it on the fifth move again, and he does go to knight h4. Okay, so he might even transpose, but I'm not sure how that works exactly. I'm not sure about the move orders and the transpositions. Okay, so this is a transposition now, I think, to that other line. I mean, I recognize this position. This has been played a fair amount. Why is the knight over there, by the way? Because it controls that square, which means the bishop can't come to f5 to protect the center. Also means the knight might jump into f5 at some point. For example, if white ends up getting an open file here, or if white happens to get a queen that supports knight f5 once he breaks up the center, the knight can be pretty well placed there. Okay, so white plays here. I'm not going to discuss all these moves, but there's that bishop c5 bishop again, like the Karpov line. And there it is. See, now the queen protects f5, so there's no real danger of that knight being useless there. Okay, black plays there, attacking the queen, and he attacks the knight and gets rid of it. So this changes the pawn structure. Really fascinating kind of pawn structure here, because this pawn could become a little bit backwards. He can't really play d5, or at least apparently he can't, because losing a pawn. And if he plays d6 at some point, that pawn can be attacked because it's on an open file. So it can be a little bit weak. Except for that, black is super active, and black's activity should easily, I think, make up for the fact. I mean, look at that beautifully centralized piece. The bishop's just zooming down here. The rook's on an open file. So that's probably going to make up for white's positional advantages. But I'm not sure if I even know that. Okay, so Kasparov suggested bishop d2 with the idea of playing either b4, driving the bishop back, or maybe bishop c3 at some point, really running into that queen. I used to play these things as white a little bit, and this is exactly what I would try to do. Here's the analysis, and this is quite sound and logical. Now f4 is going to be a threat pretty soon, not yet because it's pinned, but it's a problem. So black ducks out of the pin. I don't think he has to do that yet. This is an interesting move because it stops b4 forever and grabs some space. And so this is my pseudo analysis, is to get the pieces out really fast. Play that move, a little indirect attack there. And in fact, h3 is probably now not a very good move because this move g5 is excellent. And it's hard to say. White's probably going to have to come back because this trade is pretty bad because the king is getting pretty exposed. That's a big threat now. And also knight takes g4 is a big threat. So because of that, probably the knight would have to come back, and then you can start taking it and maybe get a small advantage. Actually, might not be much, but it's a little something. Actually, I don't... Oh yeah, well, you can't take that now, obviously, because you're going to have stuff hanging. I should say obviously, but I think the queen, all this stuff's hanging. It's not looking good. Knight e5, f4. So even though you can't take that, but you should stand fine. For example, this move. And this pawn structure means that the two bishops are not going to be any better. I doubt if white stands worse here either, actually. I think I claimed he did, but I don't really believe that. But I do think he stands equal, because it's very hard to do anything positive when you have a pawn structure like this, even with two bishops. Okay, so anyway, the analysis went here, there, here. These are very logical moves. Excellent. That stops knight f5, by the way. White's just developing and strengthening his position, protecting that. Black's just getting his pieces out fast, maybe thinking about playing d5 or b5. And he stops here, is that right? No. Yes, he does. And what do you think? I confess the a1, h8 diagonal worries me, but it seems to me that black has good development and equal play. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be playable. Notice this isn't the case of the two bishops. Both sides have two bishops. You know, maybe I agree with you. Maybe white has a little pull just because he has more space. You know, there's an e4 move at some point, really clamping down on these squares, and maybe an f4 move later. But I agree, black's so active. You know, there might be a b5 move at some point. This knight is sort of, well, it's stuck out there, isn't it? It no longer has a forward square to go to, and if it goes back, that's going to present black with a more aggressive position. So I think it is roughly equal. I'll show you what I looked at. I looked at this, knight coming back voluntarily because there's not much else to do. And you could even play here now. I think white would be better in that position, but it's certainly not much. So the main move would be here, and now I like the move f6. Because, okay, this is a little weak, that's maybe a tiny bit weak, and that's a tiny bit weak in theory, but in practice, this is a pretty sound pawn structure for black because it's so easy. Weaknesses on the third rank are notoriously easy to defend, especially as things become more and more simple. So this is so-called, you know, weaknesses on the fourth rank are bigger problems, you know, like an isolated d pawn or something, or anything pawn that's isolated on the fourth rank. Whereas even isolated pawns in the third rank are easier to protect, and these are not isolated, they're just not supported by other pawns. So, did I stop here? That's funny. Okay, so I give this move. How come? Maybe I did an extra move somewhere. Okay, so it wasn't f6. My fault. Wow. Okay, I'll just copy what I put here. Maybe I got the wrong position. That's what I get for doing it by hand. Okay, something went wrong here. Let me just see this for a second. Queen d2. Oh, I think I just stopped there. Okay, in the file I stopped there, but let me show you what I analyzed. Okay, so takes. Let me show you a real quick example of how the play might go here. Queen f4 attacking the f pawn. Now you could play e4. Rook f8. So I say a tiny plus equals, meaning a slight advantage for white. Now he can pile up on the d pawn. Black can only play d5 at the cost of some disadvantage here. On the other hand, he could play d5. I mean, that would probably equalize. The problem with these positions are when you've got good players playing, even a slight thing like the isolated pawn is not enough. You know, sometimes they say you need at least two weaknesses to lose, maybe three. And This is a pretty good example where if you take all these off, black's going to hold this endgame very easily. Well, relatively easily. I mean, I guess not against Carlsen, but this is very hard to win an endgame like that. And what else do I give here? I don't know. Oh, I pin that to isolate it that way. And bishop takes, sorry, e takes. Now, why wouldn't this be just better for, well, black's got an extra pawn, right? I mean, it's true black's king's a little more exposed than white's, but so maybe it's still about equal, but I'm surprised this was my main line. I apologize that, oh no, it isn't, I mean, he doesn't have a pawn, my mistake. Okay, so it's equal material. These are a little weak, but black's, this is very nice diagonal, and black's king's a little bit exposed. On the other hand, in the end, this will be equal. Okay. Okay, thanks. So back to the chat. I probably lost track of you guys completely. 1917. Wow, let's go back. Sorry, that was my biggest delay showing that Russell Emo stuff, but I think it's very interesting and fun. It's good to see that kind of thing. We don't do enough of that English opening stuff. Okay, he's the most famous player. One of my students loved your books, taught him more about the openings. Ah, well, thank you. Queen E3. John Hartman, hello, hello. One of our favorite viewers. Alan Llewellyn, knight D4, knight E5, queen E7, F4, D6, knight E3, queen E4, rook G1, queen E3. Oh, well. I guess he's improving on my analysis. Let's check that. Very good. I wondered how, by the way, but it was kind of fun. I just suddenly realized I didn't really know what was going on in that position. What was this? This was this knight d4 line, right? Let's look at that again. Okay, this is fun. Yeah, I was amazed it wasn't just easy, like mate or something for black. So that's why white never played it. But let me see. So we're talking about here, here, here. And I just sort of started mumbling about this, thinking there'd be a forced win for black, but then realized it wasn't so forced because of this. And then I suggested queen e4, which is what Alan says is right. And then I suggested knight check, feeling like black might be better, but Alan points out queen e3. Very nice. Oh my god, this just threatens mate and the rook. Terrific. Yeah, you'd have to play queen. No, you can't even play queen a4 check because, again, we have this problem with knight c2. So, very good. That looks like a forced win. Well, at least I had the right idea. Okay, so so that means that maybe knight e5 does lose by force. I mean, I suppose you could try this. Well, I'm going to give up here soon. Black's obviously better even if he takes that way, right? Because he's got his bishop coming out to one of these squares, and he's got the two central files. So I give up. In fact, he has to play queen here probably, and then maybe bishop g4, f3 or something. Anyway, okay, thank you, Alan. Very good. And I will close that and go back to the chat. Kasparov lost to Lothier once after he forgot his opening analysis. I wonder if that was Piquet. There was a good example of him losing to Piquet in a Grinfeld. He also got a bad game to Piquet once in the King's Indian. But maybe Lothier also. Hand, what is this 1917? I don't know what that's about. All right. So, oh, okay. No more chat questions for the moment. How's our time? Our time is not great, but I can get to a couple more things, I think. Let me just see. We could work on our great players list. One question is, has Carlsen done enough to already be on the top 10 list of great players? If you consider longevity, which I do. That's a big question. Are you talking about peak strength or most amazing performances, or does longevity count? And I think longevity does count because it shows that you were a great player for a long, long time and implies that you were, that kind of consistency I think really, really counts. So for example, Smyslov playing so well, 30 years after his peak and playing just at a almost world-class level. Well, qualifying for the candidates, winning one candidate. Well, he won one by roulette, but at least he didn't lose it. He tied one match and then lost to Kasparov. But Smyslov, Korchnoi, obviously, way past, played for the World Championship way past what theoretically is your prime age, and then did extremely well after that. Was the #2 player in the world for a long time after that, and just an amazing, amazing player. Reshevsky is one of the great examples of all time. Reshevsky's career arguably is better than anybody's who wasn't world champion, although that's always an argument. People always include Rubinstein, but I always think Rubinstein didn't. His achievements weren't as overwhelming. He may have been a tremendous, I'm sure he was a tremendous genius, but to me, Korchnoi and Reshevsky and maybe Carey's all had better achievements. So I'm just throwing this out there. You can talk, Bill James. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can. There could easily be a sabermetrics for for chess, and Jeff Sonus' site, of course, which is still up there, I believe, where he does the historical ratings, is absolutely brilliant. Even if you don't agree with everything he does, it's just so much fun to read and look at. Just fantastic stuff to look at. So anyway, maybe one more week of, you guys can send me your top 10 list for great chess players. And as I say, that means that's taking account. I mean, Steinitz could be #1 because you can't just say, well, these players were weaker. You have to consider them in the context of their times, who they played, how many great tournaments they won, how many championships they won, how long they were at the top, that kind of thing. Would be the sort of criteria that I would use. You can use your own criteria, but I don't think just peak, for 1 or 2 years would count. At least for me, that wouldn't be really good enough. But the point is that you don't have to put them against current players. You don't have to have Philidor playing Fischer, where Fischer would win 20-0 or something probably. You can put Philidor against his contemporaries. Now, it's probably not fair to go back to Philidor because we don't know. Korchnoi, there we go. Now that's for best player who didn't win the World Championship. I agree. That's certainly one of the top 3. And about what did I say? I said Reshevsky, Korchnoi, and Rubinstein. Yeah, so I would say Reshevsky and Korchnoi for the ones who didn't win the World Championship, and Carey's also. But probably the first 2, Korchnoi and Reshevsky, really stand out, I think. And look at Jeff Sonus' historical record site. Reshevsky was one of the top players of the world for an incredibly long time. By the way, another guy that is really underrated, although he's certainly not of their stature, but he should be much better known, as Maroczy. Maroczy's problem was he didn't play in a World Championship match, and he didn't win super tournaments. There weren't many super tournaments, so he kind of played in the wrong time. But his performances over a long, long period were just spectacular, just really interesting. He was a very, very strong player. Not out of the realm that we're talking about, not super player, but one who has got no attention historically. Okay, what else did I miss? Well, anyway, he's still arguing about that position. I didn't even see that part. Okay. What do we have here? Okay. Yeah, so the great players list is really something. Let me show you a sample of a great players list that I got. Jonathan Russell on the chat mentioned Kasparov first, Carlsen second, Fischer third, Tal fourth, and Capablanca fifth. Ears, always the humorist, mentions Schlechter as #1. Of course, Schlechter was a pretty good player. And what do we have here? I have a list, Garry Kasparov as #1. And, I think it's hard to argue with Garry Kasparov because he has the highest percentage by far of super tournament wins. Just won them almost won all of them when no one, and wasn't letting anybody else in. He also won more such tournaments than anyone total before recent years when they have them every couple of weeks, it seems like. And he also, won the World Championship several times. And he has both of the records for the most consecutive tournament victories at any level. And most of those tournaments were very, very strong tournaments. And he won them. He has the biggest streaks, 15 in one case, and I think 10 in the other, 9 in the other. Even some incredibly great tournament players like Fischer, I think he only had 6 straight, and they were much lower strength. So, I mean, there's just something ridiculously powerful about Kasparov during his peak years, which lasted quite a long time, actually. Karpov, of course, is the second on this list, and I think he definitely qualifies. He has the most tournament victories, actually, most victories of all types, of tournaments of all types. And, he was number 2 for so many years after he won World Championship tournaments. And putting him below Kasparov makes a lot of sense because he fought him to almost an equal record for his whole career, being the older player for most of that. I mean, maybe not at his peak for some of that. Lasker third. He was never defeated in a match. He won many world championships. He had the longest reign as a world champion, and was winning until he was relatively old. Of course, he won the great New York 24 tournament, and he was pretty old, and then was still good in the 30s. So he had some terrific victories. Putting him number 3 makes a lot of sense. Botvinnik number 4. Botvinnik's been, one thing is, since he was a communist, that people don't want to give him credit sometimes, and also he was given those chances for all those rematches. He'd lose the championship and then he'd be allowed to play again. So, and also some of the matches were, very, very close, and so maybe he hasn't gotten as much credit for that. Maybe that's fair, but if you look at his early results, he won the Soviet Championship several times. He won other incredibly strong tournaments in the late 30s and 40s, and the World Championship tournament itself was just, he just killed people, and to win the World Championship, the tournament to begin with, and when he came back to play when he was older, he still played at a very, very high level. I mean, I think putting Botvinnik up there is unusual, but not a bad choice. Elyekhin has both longevity. That's number 5, longevity and incredible peak performance. Just an amazing, in the early 30s. Then we have Fischer as number 6. One of the great peak performances of all time, maybe the greatest in that match period. Capablanca as number 7, and just a genius who was undefeated for many years. Petrosian as number 8. Now Petrosian is also not given much credit sometimes. He first of all, he did win 2 world championships, and a lot of these guys only won 1, right? I mean, like Fischer, for example. And so it's very interesting that he doesn't seem to get credit for that. And the idea is that his tournaments, he had lesser tournament results, but he also had some pretty good tournament results if you look at his overall record. Just not quite as good as the other people who are usually mentioned for the World Championship. Carries is number 9, an unusual choice. Seems a little high to me, but certainly incredible longevity. Qualified for the candidates, 6, 7, 8 times, I don't know, and got 2nd or 3rd place in several of them. And I mean, I already mentioned that maybe Korchnoi would beat him out from my point of view in a 1-to-1 comparison, but that's pretty subjective and it's hard to argue with Carries. And then 10, Smyslov, I'd probably put him further up then, because he won the hardest candidate matches, in history, pretty much 2 of them, and he won the World Championship over Botvinnik, and he even in 1948, he came in 2nd in the World Championship tournament. With amazing longevity, still playing in the World Championship cycle when he was, 60-something, I think. And an incredible tournament record. You look at Smyslov's several volume games collection, and you look at the list of the tournament results, and it's just a lot of 1s on that list. So, and of course, there's a bunch of others that, like Steinitz, Carlsen, as I've mentioned, and someone else did, and Tal could be mentioned, I suppose, and so there's all kinds of people. Send me your list. AskIamWatson@chessclub.com, and we'll talk more about it next week. How are we doing for time? Is there anything else to get in here? I mean, I'll tell you my list too at the very end. It's probably not going to be that different from some of these lists, but I'll give you my reasons for some of this stuff. Maybe that actually is a good place to stop, because the next thing is heavy analysis, and that would take forever. So I think that's a pretty good place to wrap up. Send me your great players list, your questions, and any ideas you have for a video series. As I say, probably 10 to 15, probably, I assume, hour long, maybe half hour long, but I assume it's going to be hour long. We haven't actually decided all this yet, but they're going to be a video series, and they can be on any subject, and we're trying to figure out what would interest people, and what's really going to attract people and succeed as a video series. And for those who missed it earlier, I mentioned transition to as an example, transition from opening to endgame, and maybe even from middle game to endgame, just transitions to endgames, or at least just very simplified positions. And the point being that people aren't very good at that a lot of times, so they don't know what to do, but also that there are quite a few players that probably prefer to play somewhat more simplified positions, or maybe really enjoy endgames, and realize that when they're playing these 15 and 16-year-olds at tournaments, it's just getting too intimidating how good they are tactically, and sometimes it's kind of amazing how bad they seem to be in endgames. So it's kind of a clue that maybe some of us old fogies should be heading that way. Kasparov and Fischer for number one. That's a good one. Send me askiamwatson@chessclub.com. Give me your top 10. Pillsbury might have been. We just don't have any idea, do we? But he certainly was a genius. All right. Thank you everybody for the show. Let me see any more comments that I should make. Schlechter style, yes. All right. That's enough for this week. I really appreciate it. As I say, askiamwatson@chessclub.com, and I hope you show up next week as well. Thank you, and bye-bye.